Tonight, University Bookstore is proud to host and have with us tonight one of our nation's finest elected officials, Senator Elizabeth Warren of Massachusetts. Senator Warren is going to join us and read from and discuss her book, A Fighting Chance, and we're thrilled to host you here tonight, and it's my honor to introduce you. Senator Warren was raised in a working-class family in Oklahoma. Getting a college education was not assumed, but she pursued her dream, first attending George Washington University and then the University of Houston, where she lived after she was married. Her first child was born soon after graduation, and she juggled the demands of motherhood with the challenges of law school at a time when there were few women pursuing such degrees. After receiving her law degree, she became a law professor, eventually landing at Harvard University. Early in her career, she began studying and teaching bankruptcy law, which set her on her life's course. She's become a passionate advocate for workable bankruptcy laws, for economic equality, and for consumer protection in a variety of governmental bodies. In 2011, after being passed over to serve as head of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, which she helped create, Elizabeth Warren declared her candidacy for the Senate, and after a hard-fought campaign, she joined the upper house of Congress in 2013. As a senator, she continues to advocate for economic justice and for protection against powerful corporate interests, and she is, without question, one of the brightest lights in her party. In A Fighting Chance, she discusses her years of involvement in public policy, what it has taught her, and why she continues to fight. Ladies and gentlemen, please extend a warm welcome to Senator Elizabeth Warren.
I am delighted to be in Seattle. I am delighted, after so much time in the Senate, to be in front of a live audience. I appreciate the invitation, Louise. It is great to be here at University Bookstore. As I understand it is called the bookstore. I love any place that can just refer to the bookstore. Works, and I also am delighted to be here in this church. This is terrific, so I appreciate Pastor Rich giving us this opportunity. So I thought what I'd do tonight is that I'd read a little bit from the book, tell you a little bit kind of around it so you understand what the readings are about, and then we'll take as many questions and answers as we possibly can and get through them. So I'll tell you a little bit about how this book starts. This book is my story, and it starts with me when I'm 12 years old. Now, I was a late in life baby, as they used to be referred to back then, and my mother always called me the surprise. I was about 30 before I figured out what that meant. By the time I was 12 years old, all three of my older brothers, I have three much older brothers, were all in the military, so they were all away from home. And like a lot of families in America, we had had our ups and downs through the years. But at the point when the book starts, my father had been selling carpeting. My mom was a stay-at-home mom, always had been. And then my daddy had a heart attack. And it meant a really long time in the hospital, and then not working, and the bills piled up, medical bills. We lost the family station wagon, and we were right on the edge of losing our home. And the book starts with what I think of as the day I grew up. The day I walked into my mother's and daddy's bedroom, and my mother had pulled her best dress out of the closet. And it was an older dress. She'd had it probably 10 or 15 years. And she was struggling to zip it up. And but she finally got the zipper pulled up. She was crying. She wiped her eyes, blew her nose, put on her high heels, and walked over to the Sears to apply for a minimum wage job. She was 50 years old. And she got a minimum wage job, which at this point in time was enough to keep a family of 3 afloat, because America set a minimum wage at a point where someone worked, kept a family out of poverty. And so that's what my mom did. It was a rocky time for us. And ultimately, as I walk through in the story, there was no money for college. I got a college scholarship and went off to George Washington University, where I was a debater. I'd been a debater in high school, a state champion debater. Don't cross me. But a boy that I'd known, first boy I'd ever dated, boy I dated when I was 13, dropped back into my life. He was 17 at the time, so at this point he stayed 4 years older than I was, and dropped back into my life, decided he was ready to get married, and proposed to me. And at 19, I was a pretty iffy case for whether or not I was ever going to find a husband, which my mother had made clear was my #1 job in life. And no, this is true. And so I dropped out of school in a nanosecond and married him, but I really wanted to go back to school. And so I ended up graduating from a commuter college, University of Houston, which in those days cost $50 a semester, because I grew up in an America that was investing in public education. And so anyway, what happens is we move around some. We have a baby relatively soon. I decided on my daughter's 2nd birthday to haul off and go to law school, which I mean is like totally nuts. I was the first in my family to graduate from college, much less to do something nutty like this. But I had seen lawyers on TV, and what more did you need to know? I like to say I was the first lawyer I ever met. So I hauled off and went to law school, and going to law school was actually an enormous adventure. I went to a state law school, and I'd get up every morning and I would drop Amelia off, my little daughter, at daycare. And I'd go into classes, and then I would pick her up in the afternoons, and we would tell each other stories about our adventures. And she would tell me about the boy who smeared chocolate pudding in his hair. And I would tell her about the professor who called on the coat in the back of the room, which is a true story. And we would laugh hysterically. And so that's where this part of the book that I thought I'd read about today starts. So one morning, when Amelia was little, she was sitting in a booster chair at the kitchen table eating cereal. I popped a few pieces of bread into our toaster oven, got busy doing 6 other things, and quickly forgot about the toast. When I saw the smoke pouring out of the toaster oven, I grabbed the handle, pulled out the tray, exposing 4 slices of bread that were on fire, as in flames leaping up from them. Always a quick thinker, I screamed. And I threw the tray at the kitchen sink. 3 pieces of toast hit the target, but the 4th went high, setting the cute little yellow curtains on fire. I screamed again. And then I grabbed Amelia's cereal bowl and threw it at the burning curtains. The milk doused most of the fire, and I calmed down enough to realize that throwing things was probably not my best strategy. Then I noticed that the toaster itself was shooting sparks and seemed to be on fire. How long had this thing been on? So I got a glass, filled it with water. Yeah, exactly. Took a deep breath, and poured the water on what remained of the flaming curtains. I then grabbed a towel and beat on the toaster until everything seemed quiet. It cooled off and I could unplug it. Now that may have been the year that I started so many kitchen fires that Daddy gave me a fire extinguisher for Christmas. Back then, our toaster oven had an on-off switch, and that was it. On was on, which meant that it was possible to leave toast under the little broiler all day and all night until the food burned, the wiring melted, and the whole thing burst into flames. At some point, and I don't know when, someone had the bright idea of adding a timer and an automatic shutoff. This simple change made it a whole lot harder for distracted mothers or anyone else to leave a broiler running until it set the kitchen on fire. 30 years later, while working on an article about how government could protect consumers from predatory financial companies, do you like this transition? I thought about those old toaster ovens. By then, it was all but impossible to buy a toaster that had a 1 in 5 chance of bursting into flames and burning down your house. But by the 2000s, it was possible to refinance a home with a mortgage that had a 1 in 5 chance of costing a family their home and putting them out on the street. In fact, it wasn't just possible. Those mortgages were bursting into flames all over the country. Why the difference? The United States government is the difference. By 2007, the year I was writing my article, a government agency actually monitored toasters for basic safety. And if anyone tried to sell a toaster that had a tendency to burst into flames, the agency would put a stop to it. In fact, government agencies ensured the basic safety of pretty much every basic product for sale. No lead paint in children's toys, no medicines laced with rat poison, no cars without functioning brakes, and no exploding toasters. But in 2007, there was no government agency that would stop the sale of exploding mortgages. And so, as you can imagine, this part of the story goes on off into my battles in Washington. Now, this book is a first-hand account of what I lived and what I saw up close and personal. It tells the thread of my story, but in my view, it also tells the thread of America's story. I am the daughter of a maintenance man who ended up in the United States Senate. And sure, I worked hard, but I never forget the fact that I grew up in an America that was building opportunities for kids like me. So here's how I see this. Coming out of the Great Depression, America made 2 fundamental decisions, and they are remarkable decisions because they are not decisions that had been made elsewhere or that we had made before. The first was that we put strong rules in place to help level the playing field. It was all about having a cop on the beat. No one should be able to steal your purse on Main Street or your pension on Wall Street. So the basic idea was about safety. Over time, it also was about safe drinking water, about safe medicine, and eventually about safe toasters. That was decision number 1, a cop on the beat. The second was America built a future for kids. It built a future by investing in education so that kids could get out there and learn more, earn more, produce more. It also invested in roads and bridges, in power grids. Why? Because nobody knew what the next great business idea was going to be, who was going to start the next great business. But we were all pretty sure they were going to need to be able to plug in and get power. They were all going to need to be able to have roads to get their goods to market. And they were all going to need workers who were well educated. So we made those investments together so that whoever had the great idea, whoever was willing to work for it, could get out there and do it, but could help produce more, something that would benefit us all. And the third investment we made, this one is an extraordinary one, and it speaks to something fundamental about who we are as a people. We decided to invest in ideas, in research. We decided to invest in medical research and scientific research and engineering research. We invested in research on the idea that if we built a big pipeline of ideas, our kids and our grandkids would have opportunities that we could barely dream of. So that's what we did. For 50 years, we made those investments. And here's the deal. They worked. They fundamentally worked. So as our families got richer, our country got richer, and as our country got richer, our families got richer. This is the time when America built a great middle class. And then, about 30 years ago, the Republicans started pushing for a different approach. First move, take the cops off the beat. Not off Main Street, off Wall Street. Let the big banks load up on risks. Let them paint a bullseye on the backsides of every American family. Make the word deregulation the mantra of the day. That was step one. And step two, cut taxes for those at the top. Open up huge tax loopholes for big corporations. Cut taxes for billionaires and for millionaires. And how are we going to pay for all those tax cuts? Easy, by cutting investments. Investments in education, investments in infrastructure, investments in medical research and scientific research. And what was the result? Well, banks and other big corporations made huge profits. Billionaires kept more of their money. In other words, the rich got richer and the powerful got more powerful. Meanwhile, the middle class began to crumble. The economy crashed, and our kids may be the first kids in American history to do worse than their parents did. Now, in 2009, after the crash, I was in Washington, and I was working hard on two things. One was to try to bring a little accountability to the bank bailout, and it was hand-to-hand combat. And I talk about that. I have a whole chapter about this in the book. But the other was to fight to try to get a consumer agency. I was still thinking about those toasters and thinking about how we needed an agency in Washington, not to watch out for the biggest financial institutions, but an agency in Washington that would be there to help level the playing field, to make sure that big corporations did not build their business model around tricking people, around trapping people, around cheating people. I wanted a level playing field, and I wanted this agency to be part of the Dodd-Frank financial reforms. Now, this next part's really going to surprise you. The big banks hated that idea. I know you're shocked. I know, it's the whole face, right? Who knew? So they hated it. And let me tell you how I know they hated it. I know it two ways. The first way I know that they hated it was they said so, pretty publicly. In fact, they said, and I've got the great footnotes in here, they would kill the agency. So that part has been made clear. And the second way I know is that they spent more than $1 million a day for more than a year in just lobbying expenses to kill off the financial reforms, and in particular, the little consumer agency. So, I'm going to pick the story up again, and here's where I'm going to pick it up. Remember, this is 2009. The Democrats still have control of both the House and the Senate. So, the bill starts out, financial reform starts out in the House. And at the point I pick up here, it has just made it through the House and has been sent over, the bill has been sent over to the Senate. And the big financial reform bill has as one of its features the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. The banks are not yet worried. They're going to kill that little agency while it's over in the Senate. So here's where I pick up the story again. It was Friday morning, January 15th, 2010, and the calls started coming in early. I was at home, up early, working out on the treadmill in the basement, and I was still huffing and puffing when the phone rang for the first time. Had I seen this morning's Wall Street Journal, the rumors were flying on Capitol Hill. The consumer agency wasn't going to make it. Senator Dodd, in an effort to move the larger financial reform bill forward, Senator Dodd would trade it off. There might be some face-saving attempt to set up a new consumer protection department somewhere else in government, but there would be no strong, independent agency with the authority to get much of anything done. The insiders sent the word out. Too bad, so sorry, it was a good idea, but unless the agency was dropped from the reform bill, the whole package of legislation would fail. Better to toss the consumer agency overboard and get the rest of the reforms through. I listened. So this was it. The consumer agency was dead. All the families had been cheated by big banks and the credit card companies. All the hard work by Barney, the consumer groups, Heather, Dan, the president, all that knocking on doors and all those meetings. And now it was coming to an end. So I asked if there would be a vote, even a losing vote. But the answer was no. The death wouldn't be a public execution. Instead, the Senate Banking Committee would propose a financial reform bill with no consumer agency in it. No one in the Senate, not a single Democrat or a single Republican, would ever have to vote against the agency. Instead, it would just be suffocated quietly in its crib. No one would ever know exactly who killed it or why. So I asked my last question: when? How long before the locked-in version of the bill would be introduced in the Senate Banking Committee, with or without the consumer agency? Best estimate, 3 weeks. The deal wasn't finalized, and there were still a lot of other moving pieces that needed to be worked out. So I called Dan. Now, Dan is my former student who appears much in this book and kind of my wingman in Washington. I called Dan and I said, Dan, we've got 3 weeks. Because the way I saw it, we had nothing to lose. I didn't want a job in the Capitol, so what did I care if I ticked off a lot of people in Washington? This was our last chance to get the agency passed into law. If we lost now, we lost forever. We had very little information about what had led to the latest assault on the agency, but we did know one thing. The Senate did not want a tough vote on this issue. Dan explained what that meant. The consumer agency was popular, and to a lot of senators, a vote on the new agency meant having to choose between angering the public and angering the banks. And they didn't want to do either. They preferred a quiet and slightly mysterious death for the consumer agency. So I figured, too bad, too damn bad. If a bunch of senators were going to pick the banks over the families, then the American public had a right to know. And if we didn't win, at least we could raise one hell of a stink. So that's what happens next in the book. So here's what I see, and here's what I talk about in these experiences as I ended up in Washington, often quite inadvertently, talking about the fights I got into. And do understand, spoiler alert on this, I lose a lot of these fights, but not all of them. But what I saw is that Washington works well for those who can hire armies of lobbyists and lawyers. It just doesn't work so well for everyone else. I saw it with the big banks. They cheated American families, they crashed the economy, they got bailed out, and now, today, the big 5 banks are 38% bigger than they were back in 2008. Think about that. A kid gets caught with a few ounces of pot and goes to jail, but a big bank breaks the law for years by laundering drug money, and nobody even gets arrested. The game is rigged and it's not right. That's what this book is about. And now, let me just double down on the point, because it's not just the big banks. Look at the choices the federal government makes today. Our college kids are getting crushed by student loan debt. We need to rebuild our roads and our bridges and our power grids. We need more investment in medical research and scientific research. But instead of building a future, this country is bleeding billions of dollars in tax loopholes and subsidies that go to rich and profitable corporations. Fortune 500 companies, profitable companies, pay zero in taxes. Billionaires get so many tax loopholes that they pay at lower rates than their secretaries, but they have lobbyists. Lobbyists and lawyers and lots of Republican friends in Washington to protect every loophole and every privilege. We have to face it. The game is rigged. The rich and the powerful can protect themselves, can rewrite the rules so that over and over and over, the rules get tilted just a little more, just a little more, just a little more to protect them. And everyone else, not so much. So, we can whine about this, we can whimper about this, or we can fight back. Me, I'm planning to fight back. And that is what this book is all about. This book is about the fact that the game is rigged and that it's up to us to fix it. Now, I want to say one more thing about this. Change is hard. And when you're up against organized money and organized power, it is really hard. Hard, but possible. That little Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, we got it passed into law. We got it done. And before you leave here saying, I cannot believe I am such a nerd that I was clapping for the establishment of a new consumer agency, I want to remind you why that little agency is worth clapping for. It's been in place for just a little over 2 years now. And already, it has forced the largest financial institutions in this country to return more than $3 billion directly to families they cheated. That's when government works. That's when government works. So, the way I see this is I'm not ready to turn this country over to rich corporations, to powerful individuals, and to their army of lobbyists. One of the ways I fight back is through books. I believe in books. This is not my first book. Although I have to say, the book party for Secured Transactions, a Systems Approach, yeah, was a little smaller. But do understand, I wrote this book out of gratitude. Gratitude to my mother and father who worked hard all their lives, who died with very little except the knowledge that their 4 kids were doing better than they did. I wrote this book out of gratitude to an America that invested in kids, that believed in opportunity, that put money and resources behind that so that we could build a future for not just for some of our kids, but for all of our kids. And I wrote this book out of a fierce determination that this is our moment in history, and we will not turn away from it. It is our moment when we decide what kind of a people we are and what kind of a country we are going to build. And I believe that together we will build the kind of country where every kid gets a fighting chance. So that's what it's about for me. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
First question. what should the average person be doing to support financial reforms? And this is a two-part.
Okay.
How should we best lobby for the return of Glass-Steagall,
Yes.
lessening derivatives,
Yes.
high-frequency trading, etc.?
Okay, so I love questions like this. So let me do Glass-Steagall first. For those of you who aren't totally up on your financial nerdiness, let me remind you what happened. So I'll start this story in 1794. But I'll tell it fast, okay? So roughly, about every 15 years, America used to have a bust, right? We'd have booms and then we'd have busts. We'd have booms and then we'd have busts. And the financial system would just completely fall apart, melt down, people lose all their money, all that sort of thing. We hit the 1930s and we said, we can do better than this. We can put some regulations in place. I talked partly about that, put a cop on the beat. We can watch out for that. And the second thing we said we're going to do is, you know, banking should not be so exciting. It should not be an exciting event. So what we're going to do is we're going to separate banking, your checking account, your savings account, from Wall Street and other forms of risk-taking, and build a nice, strong wall between the two, and the wall was called Glass-Steagall. And then what happened, you can guess. The smaller banks, the credit unions, they were fine with this. But as some of the financial institutions got bigger, they kept pecking at the wall. And they pecked at the wall because they wanted to be able to take some of your nice savings and some of your nice checking account money and go gamble it on Wall Street, because they figured they could make more money doing that. And it's true, they probably could if they take those risks. In the boom times, it works really well. And do understand, on the other side, they were pecking on the wall too. The investment bankers who were saying, boy, we would really love to be able to get to your checking account and your savings account. So both sides keep pecking on the wall. Mostly they get rebuffed until we hit the 1980s. And in the 1980s, the regulators, deregulation is the mantra of the day, begin to open little holes in the wall. And the two find each other, and risks start going up on the banking side of the house. Finally, at the end of the 90s, Glass-Steagall is entirely repealed. And we all know what happens next, right? The banks really load up on the risk. And in 2008, they nearly bombed this economy back into the Stone Age. It is not a story with a happy ending. So as part of the financial reforms, there were many of us who thought a starting place is to put Glass-Steagall back in place. Not because it is the only reform we need, but it is a powerful reform that we need. And would have two effects. One is to reduce the riskiness of the banking part, which means it reduces our need to bail out, because you've got to protect people's savings accounts and checking accounts, not so much whatever they're doing through Wall Street investments. The second thing it would do is it simply would bring down the size, because when you've got these humongous big five, big six, depending on how you want to count, banks, and you break them into their two component parts, at least they are somewhat smaller and somewhat more diversified. So we couldn't get it through in the financial reforms. This is one where that $1 million a day for well over a year paid off. But one of the first bills that I introduced when I got to the United States Senate with, you're gonna love these co-sponsors, with John McCain, with Maria Cantwell, and with Angus King, an independent from Maine, was a 21st century Glass-Steagall. So we have it out there, we have the bill pending, and I look at it this way. We wrote this, it is a good, tough version. It accounts for changes in the financial world. You know, you gotta kind of write these things a little differently over time. And it's there. Right now, no, we can't get it to move forward with any speed, but it's there, it's written, it's ready to go. And this brings us to the second part, and that is, what can you do about financial reform? So it's a question that's gonna go through everything I talk about now. The way I see the world is that we're playing on a tilted playing field, and the reason is because the rich and the powerful have the advantages of concentrated money, concentrated power, and they just keep getting the rules rewritten in their favor. And every time they're rewritten in their favor, they're not rewritten in favor of everybody else. So it just makes it just a little bit tougher and a little bit tougher. So how do we fight back? That becomes the fundamental question. And the answer has to be, we have to take advantage of what we've got. We got two things on our side that they don't have. We have our voices and we have our votes. And we have got to use them and use them big time. So I'm gonna give you a small thing to do about this. If you come out of this and you say, you know, I like this point you make about Glass-Steagall financial reforms, or any other part of what we talk about tonight. And I hope we get some questions on some other topics, because there are a lot of fights that I'm now involved in Washington and would love to have a chance to talk about. But we got to do something about it. We can't just say, yep, great idea, and say it to the television set. We can't all come in and talk to each other. You know, we kind of get this. It really has to be about how we reach out to our friends who live in other states and get them to go talk to their senators, get them to email their senators. How much we contribute, $5 and $10 to campaigns, how much we sign petitions. You think that stuff doesn't matter? I'm here to tell you, it matters, and it matters big time. That if we use our voices, if we use our votes, if we work collectively, we really can change the direction of this country. I not only believe it, I know it. I know it all the way down. So that's what we're going to have to do on this. We talk more about it, but that's it.
Thank you. All right, next question comes from a husband and wife who between them have multiple degrees and $250,000 in student loans. So their question is, what is your strategy to get the student loan bill to pass?
Okay. So here's the deal on student loans. All right, I want to do this a couple of different ways. So here I was, a baby senator, starting out last, what it would be, a year ago, January, right? January of 2013. And you're going to love this part. I didn't have an office. They put me in a trailer. This is a long and complicated story about the Senate moves on Senate Standard Time. So we had 12 newcomers in our, 12 senators, obviously, who left. It stayed at 100. It took 7 months for the Senate to decide who was going to have what office as we move forward. But there I was, sitting in my trailer, thinking about, I'm a senator now, I'm living large. And, okay, so I gotta tell you this story. So I had been a senator for like an hour and a half. When the security people come to tell you all the things that can happen now that you're a senator and what to do about them. So it was things like, so if you see a green gas coming through your air vents, I'm not kidding you, it was they keep this helmet thing in your drawer, and he made me put it on so I'd know how to put it on. And they go through all this. If you hear gunfire, lock your door. I'm not kidding. So they go through everything, fire, pestilence, flood, all of the things. And he's checking off his list. So the three of them sitting there, he checks off. He's very sober about this. And I'm like, really? Every time he goes through one, really. By the time he hits item number 14, I'm rethinking the whole Senate thing. And so finally he looks at me, he says, I'm to the last item on my list. And he said, tornadoes. I said, yeah. And he said, you will be pleased to know that the Capitol and the Senate office buildings are built with 14-inch thick walls with steel reinforcement and, Thor's hammer, in the middle. And so he goes on and on about, and it's strong, and he said, the official advice to senators is shelter in place. And he looks at me and says, you, however, live in a trailer. And I said, yes. And he said, my advice to you, run. So I'm sitting in my office thinking about this, living large, like I said. And the first bill I ever proposed, I walked down on the Senate floor and laid it down, and it was to say that student loans Students should be able to borrow money at the Fed discount window the same way the largest financial institutions do, for the same little fraction of a penny. Now, I really believe that's true. But the point I wanted to make is that every time we lend money to anybody, if we are doing it at below cost, we are making an investment. And as between the biggest financial institutions and our students, I would like to make the investment at least on an equal basis with our students. Now, I did that bill. I didn't think anybody would actually, well, I shouldn't say I didn't think anybody. I thought everybody would rise up and say that makes so much sense. But I got 19 people who voted for that ultimately on that bill. Didn't win, but this time around we got a new bill. And here's the new bill. So for all of you, and by the way, co-sponsors include Patty Murray and Maria Cantwell. So got our women out there making it happen. Part of the reason I am happy to be in Washington is on this bill. And here's what the bill proposes. It says that we're going to take the, listen to me on these numbers, the $1.2 trillion outstanding in student loan debt. Think about that. 40 million Americans are on the hook right now for student loan debt. We're going to take that money and we're going to refinance it down to a lower interest rate. Now, that may not sound like a lot by itself, but I just want to tell you a little bit about the realities about where that money is right now. Right now, if you have a home, most of you know, in this current low interest rate environment, you can refinance and get a lower interest rate. Businesses have already refinanced down to a much lower interest rate. Townships, municipalities have refinanced. Students don't have that opportunity. So if you got a student loan a few years ago and got hit at the 7% interest rate, 8%, 9%, just wave when I hit your number, 10%, 11%, okay, and it keeps on going. People are stuck in those loans. And now here comes the genuinely shocking part about this. So we've got people trapped in these high interest loans. Guess what that does for the US budget? The federal government is making tens of billions of dollars in profits off the student loan program. Just the cohort of loans from 2007 to 2012, just that little slice, is on target to make $66 billion in profits for the United States government. That's after the bad debt losses, after the administrative costs, after the cost of funds. Think about that. So here's what the bill proposes. The bill says we're going to refinance down to the interest rates that the Republicans just agreed to last year. Everybody voted on it. Majority of Democrats and all of the basically all the Republicans voted for, which is 3.86% for undergrad loans, a little bit higher for graduate student loans. We're going to refinance all that debt down. And how are we going to plug the hole in the budget? The answer is we're going to close up the tax loopholes and pass the Buffett rule. So, this is the right thing to do for students, but this is the strongest reminder that I can make. When we decide how we're going to spend our money as a country, we can spend billions of dollars in tax loopholes for billionaires, or we can spend billions of dollars to bring down the interest rate. Do understand, the government actually at 3.86% still makes a profit. It's just a whole lot smaller profit. And the number I picked because the Republicans had already voted for it earlier. It's the reminder, this is about economics, yep. It's about power, yep. But it is about values. And we need to spend our money in alignment with our values. So the way I see this is we got a choice right in front of us on this bill. We've got more than 30 Democratic co-sponsors already in the Senate, and there is a choice that we're going to put to the Senate and a choice that I hope everybody in America sees. as a country, we can decide to invest in billionaires, in people who've already made it, or we can decide to take dollar for dollar exactly that same money and invest in people who are trying to get a start in life. That's what this is going to be about. So, we're going to get there on this one. And actually, let me just say one more thing about this because I feel so strongly about this. This is the one, again, we have got to make our voices heard on this. The difference between this just happens in Washington and on the floor, and this happens because people across this country pay attention, because they insist that we talk about this as a country is huge. So when you leave here, bank on students. That's the title of the bill. Go Google it. Go sign one of the petitions. Being able to stand up and talk about how many people have said to the United States Senate, to the House of Representatives, this is the bill we want, it makes a difference. And understand this, we make them vote on it, we make them vote on it, we make them vote on it. And if they want to vote for billionaires and vote against students, then let them do it in a very public way, just like with the consumer agency, and then go home and explain it to the people who elected them. That's how we make this work. Yep. Okay.
Thank you. All right, this is from...
I don't feel strongly about any of this.
This is a question from Catherine Sims. What is your advice to young women hoping to have a career in public service?
Okay, Catherine, what is my advice to young women who want to have a career in public service? The answer is just do it. Oh, no, wait, someone's already used that slogan. But actually, I want to tell you, I will tell you a story that's in the book. There's a lot of stuff in the book. Spoiler alert, I do decide to run for the Senate. I win, which is even better. But in the question about whether or not I'm going to run for the United States Senate, I mean, do keep in mind, I hadn't run for anything. I never run for public office. I hadn't done the, kind of, you get in there and you run for city council and then you right and do all those things. So this was a pretty shocking notion to me. Patty Murray was the person who was recruiting persons to run for the United States Senate. And she called me and she said, I think you ought to run for the United States Senate. And I did, I'll be blunt, what a lot of women do. I said, oh, but there are things I don't know, and there's this, and there's that, and kind of kept explaining. My resume doesn't have, and it does, and I didn't have this particular experience and that qualification. Patty listens for my phone, and she says, oh, please. And she said, men never ask if they're qualified. They just say, how much money will you raise me? So I'll tell you something I did. Once I decided to run, one of the first things I noticed was there were little girls who showed up. And I mean, sometimes little tiny, sometimes bigger than tiny, but little girls who showed up at various campaign events. They'd show up. And I made a point early on, every single time I saw a little girl, I'd seek her out. And I always got down on her level. You can always tell a teacher. And I would say, my name is Elizabeth. I'm running for the United States Senate because that's what girls do. You bet. And then we do pinky promises so that we would remember. We have lots of pictures of pinky promises. We got another one?
Yeah.
Okay.
If you want it.
Yep, I'm ready.
In 1986, Social Security was fixed for the next 75 years by Reagan and Greenspan. What happened?
Yeah, let's haul Reagan and Greenspan in here to talk about that. So here's the deal in Social Security. I make a couple of points on Social Security. Social Security has been changed 30 plus times through the years because the country changes. People live longer, the number of women working shifts, how much people earn, kind of the curves change. And until the 80s, these were pretty non-controversial changes. The demographers would come in and they'd show you how the numbers were running, and you kind of you'd adjust the tax on Social Security to get it right so that Social Security would be secure forever and would be able to pay at what inflation adjusted would be about the same amount of money. And when we hit it the last time in the 80s, part of the mistake, in my view, was to ever describe it as it is fixed. No, it's fixed until we have more information about what's happening, about how long people live and so on. But the other one was that we didn't inflation adjust on the revenue side. So the benefits kept going up with inflation, but the cap on how much of your income would be subject to Social Security didn't move. And I just pointed out it's a math problem. It's not a policy proposal, it's just a math problem. That if it had adjusted for inflation, we wouldn't be having any problems with Social Security. They just would have moved together. And you know, it's not that you wouldn't have to tinker a little bit around the edges, but basically it would all work. So here's the deal. Now it's gotten caught in this political web. And it goes back once again to a fundamental question about who we are as a people and what it is we believe in. I believe we have got to solve this problem. We have got to not only make sure that Social Security is there and that it works for the rest of, what is our timeline that we can see, but basically for the rest of this century. But it is also time, now that we are caught in a terrible retirement crisis, remember the other parts of what happens in retirement. We now live in a world where the defined benefit plan is disappearing, something that was there still back in the 70s and into the 80s. We live in a world where families have been under such financial stress for so long that they have been unable to save. Just keep in mind, the median family in 1971 was able to put away about 11% of their take-home pay in savings. The median family by 2001 was putting away 0 and was, in fact, head over heels in debt. And we have watched the #1 retirement plan in America, which was pay off your house and live on your Social Security, disappear with the bottoming out of the housing market. That now is a moment when we have to think not only about how we stabilize Social Security going forward to make sure it's there for everyone who is paid in, but how it is we think about those payments so that we readjust them so that for the 14 million Americans for whom Social Security is all that stands between them and poverty, for those who most depend on it, that Social Security payments will be increased and that we will have the ability in the United States to say to everyone, after a lifetime of work, you can retire with dignity, because that's the kind of country we are. So that's what I believe. Should we quit? Get one more? You got it.
Okay, I have one final question.
One final question. Make it a good one.
Okay, it's a paragraph.
Oh, okay. They're getting a little restless down here.
Do you know about our state initiative 1329?
Whoa! Yes.
Seeking to join 16 other states that have already passed such a resolution to reduce the influence of big money in elections and to clarify that the Bill of Rights is for people, not artificial entities like corporations.
Right, okay, yes. So let me start this by saying, after being a law professor for more than 25 years, the idea of amending the United States Constitution sort of makes my eyelashes get frizzy. I mean, it's not a place I want to go. But the United States Supreme Court has given us no choice. We are going to have to amend the Constitution. And now what I want to do is I just want to angle off that to say it and say it as bluntly as I can. Every time I talk about the tilt in the playing field, I talk about the $1 million a day to lobby against the consumer agency, the fact that they're still out there, pounded on the door. They still walk through Washington, walk through the halls of Congress, blocking legislation they don't like, trying to roll over the agencies. Money has a corrupting influence. And we can never fix it perfectly. But the Supreme Court has taken us so far out of line that we, the people, have got to push back. I wrote this book, as I said earlier, out of gratitude, but also out of determination. So I want to say tonight how grateful I am to every one of you for showing up here, for showing up to talk about a book, for showing up to talk about ideas, for showing up to think about, just for an evening, what kind of a people we are and what kind of a country we're going to build going forward. One of the things that's clear in this book, if you get a chance to read it, is I didn't set my path. There was no secret desire somewhere in my heart that someday I would be a YouTube star with someone on the other end of a pointed stick. There was nowhere in here that there was a secret desire to do anything other than the one thing I announced right at the beginning. I always wanted to be a teacher. That's what I've wanted to do all my life. But this is our moment in history. And I'm not going to let this moment pass and say, I turned the other way when the big corporations just took over this country. That I turned the other way when money and influence in Washington meant that we write a set of rules that don't work for America's families. They just work for those who already have power and privilege. And so I wrote this book as a way to fight back. But I go around and do my best to talk to people about this book because I really hope that you'll be part of this fight. The only way that our kids are going to have a future, that our grandkids are going to have a future, is if we talk about our values, if we use our voices, if we use our votes. So thank you for being here tonight, but more than anything else, please be part of this fight. This is how we're going to win, and it's the only way. Thank you. 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 Thank you.